Graphics don't matter is a statement you've likely heard lots of people throw out in recent years. It's pretty much accepted as fact by the real gamers, and I happen to agree with it, but not in the way you might think. See, I believe visuals to be very important in video games, yet not necessarily graphics. So let me take your likely confused self on a journey as we explore the idea of how it's not really about the graphics, it's in fact everything else. First of all, to avoid complete confusion, throughout this video I will be referring to the entire visual experience a game offers, literally everything you can see on your screen, as the visuals, whereas graphical fidelity, or as I'll be calling it graphics for short, is just a single part of it. It's the one pertaining to the amount of detail the game is able to display, the likes of texture quality, lighting, particles and so on. But how can such a thing not matter? Well, let's establish what matter even means in this context. It obviously doesn't mean not matter at all, as in it wouldn't make any difference if it got better. Everyone pretty much agrees that better graphics are always a good thing to have, unless you're going for a low fidelity aesthetic, of course. What the statement graphics don't matter actually means is it isn't a deal breaker if they aren't cutting edges. It's like money in that way. Having hundreds of millions of dollars would be nice, but I don't really feel like I'm necessarily losing out on something if I don't have that. As long as I have just enough so as to not have it be a problem that I'm constantly thinking about, I'll be fine. It's a diminishing return, which takes a big plunge at a certain line. But that line is different for everyone, and it's the exact same with graphics. For some people, a game from the last decade is the line, for some it's 2 decades, 3, and so on. I am personally fine with anything, as long as the game is good, of course, although games which have bottom of the barrel graphics, as in probably spent like $5 on it, are most often not good in other aspects anyway. One of the instances where graphics are incredibly important is the case of pursuing photorealism. This is often what people refer to when they say graphics. Most indie games don't resemble real life that much, so graphics are at their strong point, whereas Uncharted 4 is incredibly realistic, and so it has good graphics, right? Anyway, I believe this never-ending pursuit for further realism can be nice sometimes, but we find it sometimes works against the developers in the long run as well. But how so? It's ultimately because photorealism will keep getting better for a very long time, way longer than you think. While I do agree that diminishing returns are a thing, and thus in no way can we achieve the same leap in quality in the next 30 years as we did in the past 30, we are still nowhere near as far as we can possibly get. If you disagree, you might want to get checked out for what we don't know syndrome. It's a very prevalent disease which every single generation somehow seems to contract, resulting in seemingly delusional beliefs such as "there's no way this can get any better," the young boy uttered as he gazed at Half-Life 2's graphics. On a serious note, this can be quite a disturbing idea, and understandably so, to be aware that everything you see today which seems to be as good as it can somehow get even better in the future. And it also works with beliefs, in fact, as in every single belief you hold, which is today accepted as universally true, can be completely false and debunked in the future. Pretty scary. Here's an example concerning beliefs. How do you know that in the years to come, people won't be looking at our generation for endorsing the animal agriculture industry the same way that we are at endorsing slavery? I know. This is coming from a meat eater, by the way, but truth be told, you don't, though betting on it being true is the better option. And if you think your beliefs are completely justified, well, so did the people who endorsed slavery, or else they wouldn't be doing it. Just saying. But don't beat yourself up, as this idea is close to impossible to completely divorce yourself from. I mean, I can barely comprehend it myself, and I'm sitting here writing about it for God's sake. Anyway, what I mean is that, as hard as it is to believe, people in the future will be looking at Uncharted 4 and saying, yeah, I guess it looks okay and all, but people actually found this realistic? Truth be told, graphics are still very temporary, although you should keep in mind that I don't necessarily believe that nobody should ever pursue photorealism. If anything, I at least want to know how good it can get, And while no art can ever achieve complete timelessness, getting as close as you can is good enough. You would never say, well, we can't have complete peace forever, so why even try, right? Either way, pursuing timelessness through photorealism is not the best idea. It also has the chance of entering the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley in aesthetics can simply be explained as such. On one hand, we have that which is clearly not human. It's too ridiculous and badly drawn to be disturbing, so we just find it funny. On the other hand, there is that which comes so close to real life that our mind, even if only subconsciously, perceives it as human. It doesn't even necessarily have to come that close, it just has to look normal. It's a you know it when you see it type of thing. But then there's the middle ground. Whenever something looks human, it's almost there but not quite, and it makes for an extremely disturbing picture. This is most often found in games whenever animation quality lags behind graphical fidelity, which is pretty often in fact. And whenever that's the case, things start looking like a human but not moving or acting like one, and our brain doesn't really know what to do. But photorealism isn't the only way of going about it now, is it? We also have aesthetic, which is what I believe matters more and what is almost completely timeless. One of the aspects of aesthetic is the way you go about portraying and drawing everything, aka the art style, an 8-bit art style, a comic book art style, an anime art style, and dozens of others I'm too lazy to research. Almost every distinct art style is incredibly great for achieving timelessness, as there is no real way to make them better. With photorealism, you're always working towards making it more realistic, more like real life, but with the other ones, it's just what they are. There is nothing to compare them to really. You can make them different, which some people might prefer, but rarely better per se. Whether you agree with me or not, you have to admit that World of Warcraft as an MMO, for example, is way more timeless than New World in terms of its art style. Yes, it might, much like many other cartoony games, need slight upgrades every now and then, but it's not that hard to see just how much the art style holds up and how it allows for so many different possibilities. Even games like the original Doom and Heroes of Might and Magic 2 still look amazing up until this very day thanks to their hand-drawn visuals and beautiful pixel art. It also greatly helps whenever trying to make a game memorable. Nothing really looks like Darkest Dungeon, like Minecraft, like Don't Starve. And although a lot of, say, 2D platformers can look the same at first glance, they all put their different twist on it in order to make it unique. Another approach of making it unique is pulling a twist on photorealism itself, or in other words, having a subtle art style. Take the original Dishonored as an example, one of my favorite art styles in games of all time. It might look like it's going for realism at first glance, but that isn't quite the case. It portrays characters in a very exaggerated, almost mocking manner. It's like a toned-down caricature in that way. Ugly people are really ugly, skinny people are extremely skinny, buff people are unbelievably buff. Characters are, overall, very disproportional. That's how you pull off a good twist on photorealism, so as to both ensure it looks good in the future, whilst also engaging the people today who crave realistic graphics. On the contrary, pure photorealism can be quite oppressive at times, as it allows no real room for leeway, by definition. At the end of the day, there is only one real life to pull from, thus it can end up feeling quite boring as a majority of games pretty much look the exact same art style wise. And if they don't look the same, chances are one is simply inferior to the other. A 2010 photorealism attempt will look way worse than a 2020 photorealism attempt. On the other hand, does The Walking Dead necessarily look worse than the Ori games? I don't think so, they're just different, and if you prefer one, it's simply that, a subjective preference, not an objective fact. Another important choice is what to portray. Choosing to draw a normal dragon will be way less visually pleasing than a horrifying undead blood dragon of death. It further helps to distinguish your game's art if you manage to muster up unique settings, character designs, enemy designs, and so on. A menacing Lich King clad in hulking, spiked skull armor will look way cooler than an ordinary blue guy with a sword. And yes, I get that Game of Thrones is supposed to be low fantasy, if any fantasy at all sometimes, but we're talking about what looks cool here, not what works. Of course, the pursuit of uniqueness only works to a certain point, albeit this is still very subjective. Some people can play a game where weapons look like this, others might not be able to tolerate a game where you wield just a slightly unrealistically sized sword, and some can't even bother to boot up any fantasy game for that matter. But which one is more important in the end? What to portray or how to portray it? To be frank with you, I can't really say, as I often find myself wishing to see a certain game's idea in a bunch of different art styles, just as much as I am to see a particular art style portray various ideas. But there is one aspect which is more important than both of these. Finally, we have with what you choose to portray, aka the color palette. Color is king to me, and it's easily the thing which makes the ultimate lasting impression. If you want your game to look good, you have to be able to pull it off. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, Ori and the Will of the Wisps. What really makes these games' visuals so amazing is the way they are able to incorporate so many different colors and themes within the same world and fade them together so as to look natural. You won't see all the colors on your screen at the same time, that just looks like unicorn vomit. The true pinnacle of color theory is being able to point to every single shade of each color and not have it look that way. Here's another example, Doom 2016 vs Doom Eternal. This might be a controversial opinion, but I kind of hated the way Doom 2016 looked. To me, it is the most disappointing case of bland color palette induced by a photorealistic approach. What goes on to lift the pleasure of the visual experience in this game so greatly is not any significant graphic improvements, but the color palette in fact. The colors in Doom Eternal are nothing short of horrifyingly gorgeous. Crumbling buildings engulfed in hellish flames, a grey and gloomy fortress cowering below a shrouded sky, amidst a harsh snow environment lies a base beaming with the orange colors of evil technology, a town infested by a fleshy-toothed abomination called the Super Gore Nest, the angelic, disturbing, white and gold world of Urdak. Doom Eternal has it all, without going too overboard of course. But you don't always have to do that. Conjuring multiple concoctions of beautiful color schemes is great, but one can be just enough, as long as it is good. Games such as Bioshock Infinite or Firewatch, for example. Both of these games have a pretty distinct and somewhat reserved color palette, but it's such a good one that you don't really feel the need for more. This also might help at making a game more recognizable compared to the former approach. If we reduce the number of colors even more, we get games like Limbo, Darkwood, and one of my favorite games of all time, Hollow Knight, which can be quite colorful at times, but at others it can feel like, alright, how many shades of grey can we use now? And it still looks amazing. So, as we established, graphics being good is pretty nice, but them being bad most often isn't the deal breaker, and if it is, you are the problem, not the game. With these three aspects, however, it is both a bigger improvement if they are better and a bigger deal if they are not as good. If your art style is confusing to look at and goes against the theme of the setting, the atmosphere will suffer. If your characters have dumb costumes and if your enemies don't look threatening, we can't take them seriously. And if your color palette hurts my eyes and messes with my depth perception and comprehension of the visuals, then the game simply becomes a chore to play. Therefore, if aesthetics cause bigger shifts in the game's visual experience whenever meddled with, then it only follows that they are what is truly in fact important. Hey, thanks for watching. Make sure to tell me if you enjoy this kind of informational, I guess you can say rapid fire short essay type of format. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.